Hi everyone, I am back with a very special Tourette Talk video today. Today I am joined by Michael and I'm joined by Jhonelle. You might remember Jhonelle. We did a Tourette Talk a little while back now at this point where we learned about her life with Tourette syndrome. And now we are also joined with Michael to talk about topics of Tourette syndrome in different, we all come from different backgrounds. We have different ethnicities, we have different races, and different backgrounds cause different things in different livelihoods for us growing up, whether that's family, friends, whatever it might be. So today we're going to talk about that. And I'm hoping to sit here and learn right along with all of you. And I know this is going to be such an important and powerful video. So I am so excited. Thank you both so much for being here.
Of course.
Happy to be here.
All right. So first things first, I want to get started in asking, when were you diagnosed with Tourette syndrome?
Okay.
Jhonelle, why don't you go first?
Okay, cool. I was not diagnosed with Tourette syndrome until I was 26, I believe. Now I'm 27, but I wasn't diagnosed until I was 26. But I've been dealing with having tics for like 12 years. So that started when I was about 15 or 16.
Okay. And Michael, when were you diagnosed?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed when I was 14. But similar to Jhonelle, I had tics when around age 5 is when I started to have tics. So that's about, if I can do math, about like 8-9 years from symptoms to like diagnosis.
Okay. Wow. So when you were younger or just previous in those years, was there anything that you thought might have been happening? Were you just brushing it off thinking like, oh, that was it's just like a really weird thing that I do? Or did you guys know about Tourette syndrome and have like an inkling at all?
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, good question. So for me, I knew, well, to be honest with you, I thought it was just what everybody did, to be honest. Like I didn't think it's kind of like you don't know what not normal is until you learn quote unquote what normal is. So that's really what it was for me. Is I had tics. I would like walk funny. Like usually when I was walking, like I had to do like I had like a lunging tic, or I would I had some throat clearing tics, and like I was always like moving around more. Like to me, I was just moving around more. Right.
Yeah.
I now know kind of in retrospect, I can explain it as like, oh, that was a head tic, a neck tic, and a facial grimace, and an eye. It was just kind of like, oh, I just move around a lot. But again, like it never was so severe enough, like at that age, at least between like 5 and 10, where people actually would point it out. And I was actually kind of I was in and out of special ed and special education. So everybody there already was a little bit more hyperactive, and we were younger. So it didn't get that attention from like teachers or anybody. And for me, I never really complained about it because I didn't get bullied for it when I was like really, really young. So to me, I was like, oh, whatever, like, all right, cool. Like I do this. This is just life. This is just how it is. So really that's what it was like for me. And I guess talking about culture, my family, like in the Philippines, like we don't, they didn't even know what like neurologists or psychiatrists were. So I just didn't even think of, it's just not in our brains to think that something can be wrong with your brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, yeah, cool. Like this is just what people do. And to be honest with you, it wasn't until people gave me trouble for it that I was like, oh, this is not normal. Like if it was just me, just living my life, I was like, oh, whatever. Like, okay, like I have to shake my head, whatever. Like it is what it is. Like, it was just what it was. It wasn't until someone brings it up as being different, I was like, oh crap, like I'm different.
Yeah, that's always really interesting. Jhonelle, what about you?
Yeah, sure. So for me, since I didn't start developing tics until I was 15 or 16, of course, it was later in life. So I did have a time period where this is how it was, and then all of a sudden, this is happening. This is weird. I did actually know what it was about. I was educated on Tourette syndrome, and I had also already been in like some psychology classes. So I was like, something funny is going on in my body. Let me use the internet. There wasn't really like support stuff back then. It was just like WebMD. So I just kind of like I was like researching, and I kind of came to the conclusion that this is something that's involuntary. So it's probably something like movement wise. So I looked up like different movement disorders and related stuff and came to like tic disorders. So I went to my parents and told them like, hey, this is kind of started happening. And my family is Jamaican. I'm like first generation Jamaican American. So for them, it's not a thing either. It's just kind of like, no, you're fine. Like, go pray. Stop messing around. Or it's seen as something intentional, like behavioral. So that's probably what caused such a long period between when I first started showing symptoms of tics to actually getting diagnosed. Kind of like what Michael said.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you both for sharing that, because that's really interesting for me to hear both of those things where it's kind of just not brushed off, but kind of brushed off at first with the first reaction for a parent. Do you think, was it harder, do you think, to get the diagnosis or get like, especially at a young age when you still kind of need a parent to take you to the doctor, was it harder to get them at all to get you to that doctor? Was that like a lot of like an argument that you kind of had to defend?
Well, for me in my situation, I had to wait until I don't know if it's the same everywhere in America, but I know here once you're 26, that's like the longest you can hold on to staying on your parents' insurance. And so I knew that my parents weren't necessarily going to invest, and even as an adult, like pay for something or get the bill. Just it would cause a lot of conflict if I did, seek it going forward, because you have to start at your like pediatrician, or you have to start at your primary care doctor before they can refer you to a neurologist, and usually the neurologist will want to see you once or twice, so that's extra money for a specialist. So I had to wait until I got kicked off of my parents' insurance, and I had my own insurance at a more like adulting job to be able to actually like, spend my own money to get a diagnosis.
Wow.
So that wasn't even a question with my parents, like going to the doctor to see what it was. And I do remember I went to, as a kid or as I was younger, I would go to the doctor and, they'd be like, anything else? Or do you have any other concerns? And I remember that just always sitting like in me, like I do, but like my mom would be in the room, as I was like 15 when it had first started, or even like 16 or 17, she would still go with me because we both would see the same doctor. So he would just kind of go one after the other. She was always there. And the doctor would always say like, oh, anything else? Do you have any other concerns? Any other issues you want to bring up? But I knew that if I mentioned it, like my mom would see it as, like, oh, this again, like, no, you're fine. So I would just always say no. And yeah, it just wasn't really a thing. Like Michael had said with his family, it wasn't really a thought to go to the doctor for this situation.
Yeah, that had been hard to have to wait, knowing something was inside of you brewing that whole time, and just knowing you had to wait to get somebody to confirm it, because that's a huge thing for a lot of people. I know that having that diagnosis and having that answer, even if you kind of sort of knew the answer the whole time, it's just like that, oh, I'm not crazy. Like I didn't imagine all of this. I knew, like, it's just that confirmation that is just kind of a weight lifted sometimes, I think, especially when I think, and I'm not speaking from experience since I was a child when I was diagnosed, but it seems like, especially when it's that long, knowing something's there, it's kind of like a weight lifted, because now you can tell people if they say, hey, what was that? Now, if you choose to, I can say, oh, well, I have Tourette syndrome of the tick. Where before it's kind of like, it's just something I do.
Yeah. Before I'd be like, I think I have, this, that, the other. I think it's a tick disorder, but nothing was officially like, there. So then people will be like, oh, stop self-diagnosing yourself. That's a whole other issue. So,
yeah. I know about that one. So
I think all three of us know about that one.
Yes.
Oh, for sure.
But actually, I wanted to build, to answer the question shortly, yes. Yes is the answer to the question, but I think it's like deeper than just when you were going to the doctor? Like, was it difficult? Was there pushback? Like, yes, there was. But it's actually, I wanted to touch more on what Jhonelle was saying about like not even knowing that this is something you could go to the doctor for. And I think that was like huge because, so the timeline, right? Like age 5 more or less is when it takes. Age 14 is when I was diagnosed. I didn't go to the doctor for the first time until I was maybe like 12 or 13. The first time we had that thought of going to the doctor was maybe like at 11. So yeah, sure, maybe from age 11 to age 13 or to when I got diagnosed, the kind of that pushback and the classic what we're talking about of hesitance towards getting help for that played a role. But what happened to the other 6 years, right? What happened to 5 and 11? And that's kind of the point I wanted to build on what Jhonelle was saying about not even knowing that you have to go. And I speak in analogies. I think having Tourette's,
Yes.
I want to speak in analogies. And my analogy is this: if you have a 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid, and every day they're like, hey, like mom, dad, like whoever, like I have a headache, like I have a stomach ache. And then next week it's like, oh, like my stomach ache got worse. And then it's like 6 months later, it's like, oh my God, like now, like I still have a stomach ache and I always get a stomach ache at this time. Like, honestly, most parents won't even wait 6 months before like you're in the office, you're Googling treatments, you're Googling this and that. Like you just kind of know to go, right? Like stomach ache, your arm hurts and it's repeated and it's getting worse. Like you go, right? Like it's what it is. Like you just go. Like it's just just a fact that people just know to do that. It's just a norm that you know to do that. But for me, it's just so interesting because they'll notice like, okay, Michael is like doing these weird lunges when he walks. Like he's always making these like weird sounds. And instead of saying like, is there something wrong? Is this medical? Is this something that we can get help for? It doesn't make sense, but it's just kind of pushed onto me as, why are you doing that? Or like, what the heck are you doing? Or why do you keep doing that? Or can you stop doing that or stop being disruptive? And for cultural context, right? So I'm Filipino. I was born in California, but my parents are both from the Philippines. They're born and raised there. They came. I think it is important, to emphasize not just, what country is my family from, but also like, when did they come? Because they didn't come until they were like 20, 25. And I think that's very different from
same.
when they were like 50 or if they came when they were like 10. Because if you think about it now, we're all in the general age range of like 25, 30, something like, right? Like mid 20s, right? Around when my parents came. And it's like you had a whole life and then you go to a completely different like culture. That's what happened to my parents, is like in the Philippines, especially 20, 30, 40 years ago when they were growing up, like you don't talk about neurological disorders and
or mental health.
Exactly. You don't talk about that. And also this is where I bring up like, it's a third world country. Like they're like the issues there that they're dealing with. They're dealing with poverty. They're dealing with people. Their homes are like tarps, right? Like there's just a different set of issues back then that the population and still now is like facing. And because of that, it's like, okay, like who cares if you're doing all this? Like just get over it, like tough it out, like literally like tough it out. And that is kind of what happened to that age 5 to age 11. Like it was just like, okay, like this is not something you go to the doctor for. I think that's where, awareness plays a big role, but how do you get someone to believe it? That's like a whole nother part, right? It's not as simple as just saying, this is what it is, but it's also getting them to believe that. But yeah, and when I actually tried to go get treatment, then you have the whole game of kind of what the whole same exact story seems is what Jhonelle was talking about like kind of resistance to actually asking help for it, not wanting to, kind of that very stigmatized. And I definitely faced that as well. But the whole delay really just came from, we had no idea, literally had no idea.
So do you think because there's so, I feel like so, at least from what I see, it's so little representation of people with different cultures, different races with Tourette syndrome, do you think that also played a role in the thought of like, oh, well, you can't possibly have that or something because they also didn't, or your families also didn't see anybody else that, looked like you that had it?
later on, in terms of like being diagnosed, for me, that didn't play a role, but that representation played a huge role when I was older, in the sense of when I was trying to come to terms and accepting my diagnosis when I was like 15, 16, like, and I was like really struggling with accepting it. I was like, oh my God, I'm like the only person of color, like nobody else has like TS. And I was like, I know it's out there, and it just that's added to my frustration.
Yeah.
But in terms of being diagnosed, from my experience, that didn't necessarily play a role, because to be honest, I don't even think we were there. My family just didn't think it was like real, or it didn't even exist.
Okay.
Not even if we saw someone of color like with it, it was just like just conceptually, they just didn't believe it was real. It's like, if you don't believe something's real and you see it, that doesn't still make you believe it's real. Sometimes you just don't want to believe it.
Right.
So we weren't even there yet talking about representation. Like we weren't even there yet in our minds.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I forgot the question. What was the question?
I feel like the lack of representation and like not seeing people like you, like, do you think that helped in like a negative sense of like getting that diagnosis, or getting your family to believe it, or things like that?
Okay, yes. Yeah, I feel like that was definitely a thing. I do feel like, I mean, of course, the prevalence is the same just about in every culture. You know, Tourette syndrome is not just something that white people deal with. It's not just something that boys deal with. It's not just something, you know what I mean?
Right.
But because I feel like in order to get a diagnosis, you have to have, you know, check off XYZ. But the other part that they forget is you have to have a willingness to go in the first place.
Right.
So even though their prevalence might still be the same, if you have people that don't have the willingness to go, or even the knowledge that it is something that you can go get checked out or get a diagnosis for, then it seems like there's a lot of less people. And then even on top of that, if you do get a diagnosis and you do have that willingness to go, there's still that stigma and that shame that's attached to it to not talk about it within like your culture, within the family, within just, like, I know for me, like growing up, my mom used to always say, like, don't tell our business. So it was very much a thing that she valued, and like Jamaicans value, like, you don't, I mean, yes, people still do gossip, but you don't just tell all of your business to everybody. Like, that's something you're just going to keep like inside, where you're going to forget that, whatever it may be, even if it's something just like medical, you know, like we're not going to talk about that. That doesn't exist. Just kind of like pushing it under the rug. So even if it is something that people do have the willingness to go, it's not always something that you're going to see them as like advocates for, or you know, trying to educate and spread awareness for.
And before I forget, sorry, I'll jump in. I wanted you made while you're talking, you made me think of something where, you know, in my opinion, it's not, you know, Tourette's is different in every person, but I do think that because when you think about what Jhonelle is talking about, like shame, and then you know that, you know, people with Tourette's, like some people like suppress their tics. And then for me, a big thing was like, I suppressed my tics because I felt like ashamed. And it was like, you know, family is huge in like Filipino culture.
Yeah.
If I tic, I'm bringing shame to like my family, so I can't like tic. And that actually changed the way that Tourette's presents, because like because I'm suppressing it all the time. You know, right now I can articulate that to my parents as like, okay, I'm like suppressing my tics. It's not that my tics are better, but I'm suppressing them. But when I was like 10 and I don't even know what Tourette's or tics are, I don't have the words to explain that I was suppressing it. And nor do my parents. They don't even know what it is. So when we went to the doctor for the first time, I went to a PCP. And my parents, I mean, they literally didn't have the language for it. It's like if you are trying to explain, you know, rocket science, but you have to speak it in a foreign language. Like you do not have the words.
Yeah, I don't have the words in English, so.
You know, and not to mention, quite literally, you know, my parents were language, not to mention that. And you know, for them, it was just kind of like, look, like we don't really know, but he sometimes does, he sometimes moves like this. Sometimes does that. He sometimes makes weird sounds. We don't know why he's doing it. He doesn't do it all the time. Sometimes he does it. Sometimes he doesn't. His teachers never notice it because I always suppressed it at school and suppressed it around them. And I suppressed it at the doctor's appointment, and I didn't even know that I was doing it.
Yeah.
And, it's some physicians see Tourette's right in front of them and the tick, and they still can't diagnose it. So how are they? There's not many people were going to be able to pick up on that as being Tourette syndrome. But they didn't, right? So that's kind of what led to this chain of 3 years of being misdiagnosed, because literally they didn't have the words for it. And it kind of came down to, and this was kind of the first moment that I was like, what the hell? Sorry, like where my parents got so desperate that they were trying to like record me when they didn't know that I was like watching. So like, and the only time that would be is like if I was like in the bathroom or I was like coming out of the shower, or like just randomly they would like try to like videotape me. And then it made me even more on edge, because then I was like, okay, literally, if I'm in the bathroom, if the door's not shut, I can't be myself. I didn't even know what was going on, because the doctor said that they couldn't diagnose me unless they saw it. But we now know, right, retroactively, that they were never going to see it, because I was just suppressing it as much as I could. So, that's what I was saying. It presents differently, right? It was the same thing. It presents differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like even when I got older, because I don't remember a lot about my neurologist appointments when I was younger, because I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I don't remember anything. I remember getting a sucker when I went. But even when I went back when I got older, so like when I went to get on medication in my senior year of high school and college, I still, for some reason, even around a neurologist, had this feeling of uncomfortableness. Like I had to suppress it, because I still felt like, well, if I'm ticking here, I'm just going to look like I'm doing this just to get a medication, or I'm doing it extra because I'm in front of the doctor. Like, it's so weird how that still presents to us, even when we're by those experts. I would put in quotes.
Yeah.
Not all doctors are great, as we probably all know. But like, it's just so weird how that is even around the doctor who we're trying to get to help us with this thing we have, still not feeling comfortable to do it.
Yeah. And I also feel like part of it is, I mean, even in front of the doctor, like they're probably a stranger, I just met you, and I think about how I react in public with strangers at the grocery store or whatever, and I don't want them to see me tick. So naturally it makes sense to be at the doctor or neurologist and not want them to see you tick, especially if you know that they're looking for it.
Right.
Like, oh no. So yeah, I could see how that happens, because awkward. And I feel like part of it is, that shame. Like, so for example, like with me, the very first time that I did tick, I was at school. It was like a summer course, and the class was only available in the summer. So I took the summer course, and the person that was sitting next to me, and my tick wasn't even, I don't think, since I've had so many ticks now, I don't think the tick was all that grand. Like I literally just like moved my head to the side. And the person next to me like moved away. It was very dramatic, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, what the heck was that? You look possessed." And started laughing. So like that was my very first experience. That already instilled like that shame, and like, well, this is different. This is something I should not be doing. And then when I was still dealing with it for the rest of that week, and then tell my parents, and them saying like, "Oh, like no, you're fine. Just pray. Like that's not a thing. That's not real. Yeah. You're just messing around. Stop playing around." That also instilled that shame on top of it. And then the way, when you go out in public, the way society views you, the way they look at you, the way they respond to your ticks, or even like discriminate against you, that just adds on top of it. So it's like a really deep hole that you're in. And it's so weird to just like be able to, go somewhere and just be like, I'm just going to tick, or I'm not going to suppress. Right. And for me, I suppressed all the time. Like at school, because I did let them out a little bit more at school compared to home, because home for sure was like a no, like can't do that. So I did let them out in some classes at school, but for the most part, also like like high school, you don't want to, like most of my class, it was a small school. Most of my class knew me for the first like year, and then all of a sudden in the summer, in that course, people see me ticking and they're like, what are you doing? And then the fall comes and I'm ticking, and of course people are like, what? Like, people would look at me and they're like, looking like, why are you doing that? Like, what are you doing? Which just adds more shame. So it makes sense why people just like feel the need to suppress. And like Michael said, like, even when he didn't have the words to put to it, that's what he was doing. And before I even knew the words to put to it, what I was doing, that's just, I don't know, almost like automatic for you to do to try to survive.
I'm so hyper aware, like when I tick in public and I happen to hear somebody giggle or laugh after I tick, I'm very hyper aware to be like, were they just laughing at me? Like, were they just making fun of me? Like,
I literally do the same thing. And it's actually something, that in therapy for that I have to unlearn, is because that has happened so many times where it actually does happen, right? That now I kind of just generalize to this anxiety of anytime I see someone in my general vicinity, like laugh or like whisper to someone, I literally just assume that they're talking about me, even if I didn't tick.
Yeah.
right.
That actually, like, that is so real that like I've actually like it developed into like an anxiety that I have that half the time is like irrational because I'm just walking by because no one knows they're talking about me. But at the same time, if it even just happens once, that is enough to confirm all of the irrational anxiety. So
yeah,
that.
Yeah,
I feel that.
yeah. And the thing I always have to like try to remind myself is like, most people are very much more, and not even necessarily, I'm not necessarily saying this in a bad way, just we're all guilty of it. Most people are just more self-absorbed that they didn't even see you. Like, they didn't even notice you do anything at all. Right. But in my head, I'm like, oh, wait, you just laughed like a second after I ticked or while I was ticking. And now I feel like it was at me. And now I'm going to just curl back up into my little suppression ball and wait till I get back to my car.
Or you have a tick where you move a lot, or you move like suddenly and then somebody looks your way and you're just like,
yeah.
Nice day we're having. I feel that. Oh, that has happened so many times to me. The grocery store or something. And just, places, restaurants. I remember one time I was ticking a lot. I had a stomping tick where I would just kind of like stomp in place. And we were at this restaurant for like breakfast, lunch type of thing, brunch. And this girl kept looking at me. And I don't know, like, now thinking back, like, was she looking at me or was she looking at the door behind me waiting to see when her food was going to come? Because, you never know. But I felt like every time I would do the stomping thing, she'd look at me. And I'm just like, I'm just here trying to enjoy brunch like everybody else. But yeah, it was like constant until she got her food and then she stopped. So then I was like, maybe she was just looking at the door, waiting to see when her food was coming. Or maybe she was looking at me, but then when she got her food, she's like, I don't care. I will never know. But either way, like their response to how I tick, it's not my responsibility to try to figure out. Like, they're going to think what they're going to think. And I'm ticking like I can't control it. I'm not sitting here trying to stomp to annoy people on purpose. Like, trust me, I have better things to do with my time. So I can't, control what it is. And like I said, to this day, I still don't know like which one was it. But there's those moments where you deal with it. You just have to like, gotta let it go. Just let it go. Enjoy your brunch. Enjoy whatever you're doing. Just let it go.